Yes, welcome. This is F for Rap Critic, and no, it's not Schoolboy Q. It's your boy Malik 16, and yeah, we got a special episode today, and I feel it's only right. We owe on this channel, or I owe on this channel, the long and much needed do-over because the first time I reviewed an album by The Roots, it was I just feel like I owe a better Roots episode because of the sound quality. Anybody who wants to go back and check out my review of one of my personal favorite rap albums of all time, Untitled Half-Life, feel free to do it. And while you're at it, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. But with great power comes great responsibility. So with no further ado, today we are going over, however you count it, the third or fourth studio album by none other than the legendary Roots crew, Things Fall Apart. This album just happens to be turning 25 years old this month, so it only makes sense that we kick it off like this. This is category 1, where we go over the product, the album itself. A little background on this LP. It was released on February 23rd of 1999 on Geffen or MCA Records, which was way more of MCA at that point than Geffen was, due to lots of mergers that were going on in the industry. With no further ado, first dimension is going to be quality of the production. All right. As I stated in the Untitled Half-Life review, and y'all can inform me in the comments, please feel free, you will see the production collective known as the Grand Niggas, which were sometimes credited as the Grand Wizards, were fully credited as the Grand Wizards on this album. And until I get a member from the Roots on the show to really break this down, I will continue to be in the dark and a little bit in awe and amazement of how production works when you have a live band doing stuff, but you also have studio producers collaborating, right? So for instance, the track Dynamite, which is credited as a Jay Dilla production, but the track Table of Contents, which has Jay Dilla co-production credit, but is led by Questlove. How does that work, right? Is it like you guys come up with drum programming on top of live drumming and add bass lines with I'd love to know how this all works. And then we get tracks that are super unorthodox, like 100% Dundee, which was the hot topic when this album dropped, because they were saying this track was all produced by Rozelle, the godfather of noise, doing the drum and bass components with his mouth. And built around that was Kamal doing like this bubbly piano. But in Black Thought's recounting of this beat being made, it was Scott Storch that he credited with the piano keys here. One critique, speaking of Kamal, at least by one critic when the album was reviewed and it came out, and said he relied too much on ostinato style piano playing. And I do say there is a sound to this album. We'll talk more about it as we go through some of the other dimensions, but there's a definite sound drum wise and key wise, and a lot of it has to do with how they were kind of shifting responsibilities between personnel. James Poyser is involved in the production on this album as much as Scott Storch is. And again, we talked about Dilla, we talked about Grand Wizard. There's also a producer credited on here by the name of Chaos. Another thing that happens, which the Roots aren't foreign to, sampling, right? And they've dabbled in that territory, but on this is the first time you get a full-out remake where they take Schoolie D's classic 80s Philly joint, Saturday Night, which was also sampled by the Young Guns on their debut album, which also turns 20 this year. Shout out to Chris and Neef for their track Friday Night. So it's a Philly classic that's been given new life through all these remakes, or at least reuses of the beat, and the Roots essentially don't change anything with that beat. Jazzy Jeff is also featured doing the scratches on the track Next Movement, and then they have yet another extended member of the crew, Scratch, on tracks like Adrenaline. He is a part of the beat on Adrenaline, but Adrenaline's another track that was credited to Scott Storch. The story is that Scott Storch had the skeleton, or the main melody of that beat, sitting around in his demos that he would play for the group, and they selected it early in the game, like, oh, we're doing that. if ever the Roots were doubted as being a boom bap group, I don't know why anyone would do that, but maybe because their debut to the mainstream, Do You Want More, was the album that kind of had them lumped in as I mentioned this before, like a Buckshot LaFonk kind of experimental jazz rap group where they just pure hip hop, and they proved that on Untitled Half-Life. This was them doubling down on that boom bap. That's going to be the heart of this album, from Table of Contents to Double Trouble to 100% Dundee, You Don't See Us. That seems to be like the main construction, and the two things are happening here. So Black Thought says he does his best work over rapidy rap beats that just seemed like they were very rapper friendly, right? You think of a darker track like Step Into the Realm, which is not as boom bap, but because it fades in and out with the bass and the drums, you hear where they're emphasized. It's more melody driven because it's looming, but it's the only track on the album like that, unless you want to compare it to Spark, which is Malik B's solo. But Malik B's solo, and we'll talk about that. It seems that Malik B, when it's time for him to have the tracks to himself, he either is given or gravitates more towards these like calm, sedated type of jazzy beats in the traditional vein. When I think of the beat that he chose on Untitled Half-Life for his solo, No Great Pretender, it's probably the most jazzy beat on the album besides the actual jazz song One Shine. And I'm like, interesting choice, Malik B. He does the same thing here. Spark is probably the lightest beat on here. It has an airiness. It's pretty stripped down. Doesn't have a lot going on, and but you compare that to what happens with the Dilla offering Dynamite, which is this crazy, it's almost like a bass solo. The jazz sample that Dilla uses, a track called Indiana, which is lumped in with Dilla's signature syncopated swing, right? I always thought that beat was so interesting. It didn't sound like anything that was being done in hip hop at the time. And years later, it fits in with anything that you want to throw on by Dilla. And I still challenge anybody to try to freestyle over that, because it pushes the rapper in a direction. It's subtly suggestive. It's going to map out a direction for the rapper to go, and it's interesting to see how many rappers take to it, so definitely different, but still capturing that boom bap because of J Dilla's signature drums. But you take Table of Contents Part 1, because it started out being something that was going to be a 4-parter. Anybody who's ever heard Part 3 to that, it sounds like such a quintessential Dilla beat. But here you could tell, this is Questlove going ham on those cymbals and drums. You could tell this is live drumming, and this is what separates it from just being a pure Dilla production, and this is why this is a collaboration. But again, I don't know where it begins and where it ends, but Questlove is going ham on those cymbals and clashes. And when I say two things are happening here, Questlove said he was trying to keep up and silently compete with JD, because JD was observing the work that he was doing on a D'Angelo project at the time, because part of this album was recorded at the Electric Ladyland Studios in New York. Some of it was recorded in Philly, some of it was recorded in Battery Studios, so going all over the place. But as you all should know by now, Electric Ladyland Studio is where the Soul Quarians began. And that's the collective that included James Poyser, D'Angelo, and J Dilla, and had collaborators in the mix like Erykah Badu. So they would go back and forth. Dilla memorized some of the stuff that Quest and D'Angelo were doing and recreated it. So then Quest tried to recreate it, and then they tried to recreate each other's timing and style, and they collaborated, because it came to this idea of can't beat them, join them, because there was such admiration and respect for each other's approach to their craft, and they just became lumped in together. Yeah, Aquarius. By the time this comes out, Aquarius season should have officially ended, but shout out to all of y'all water bearers out there. Now, Black Thought says that it's just kind of in the Roots tradition to always have a stripped down drum and the voice as the secondary instrument, whereas Table of Contents is very drum and vocals. We can't forget the role that the bass plays. On Table of Contents 2, where Malik B comes in, it's a little bit more subtle. Again, him going for the more stripped down. I remember thinking that beat was boring after hearing how much frenetic energy was going on Table of Contents 1. I'm like, man, this is how the album's opening, and it's like coming for your throat. And then Malik's there to calm it down, cool, but the beat seemed very uninspired following that, because it's just like boom, 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 ba-doom, doom, ba-doom, boom, ba-doom, boom, boom, boom. You can hear Dilla bass all in that though. So really, really interesting collaborations. But then you go to a track like Double Trouble, where again, unorthodox drums. It sounds like Questlove is on full attack and doing like a solo, a very organized solo, but it's not. It's a perfect blending of like different instruments that you don't expect. We got xylophones going on until you get to the verse parts, where it's more of a volley back and forth drum. Just the spacey sounds that come in on the hook of Double Trouble, and the way the pattern switches up and then goes back, and then there's a second movement at the end. Speaking of next movements, right? There's a second movement at the end where it just breaks down into this simple keyboard melody that which is an homage to, you know, old jazz and old hip hop. But really, when you talk about the vocal as the final instrument, more than I think Table of Contents, what most and Black Thought do on Double Trouble really fill that song in and match the spastic energy that was created by the xylophone and the drums, and really, really just make it a song that's almost too full. You could add nothing more to it. You have that. I read somewhere that the beat on Act 2, Love of My Life, was like Cosby Show-ish. And I thought about it, and I'm like, oh yeah, where else were we hearing those kind of muted Bobby McFerrin kind of like, it's mostly vocals, and that little distant horn sound in the back with warped bubbly sounds going in and out, while the bass line is the main part for the verses. So it's just like, oh, and they come in and out at different points, like just when you need them to create airiness. And then it ends with a whole string section. They were going big on that song's production. They knew this was going to create a mood, and it does. A lot of people consider it one of the best beats, one of the best root songs. It was a much needed lighter touch without being cheesy. The decision to end You Got Me the way it was ended, Questlove said, was in response to the rising popularity of the drum and bass movement in the UK. What a time to be alive. People remember how big garage and drum and bass music had become. It was definitely UK's export, but that decision to do the double time was also, I think, right on time. And we'll talk about the importance of timing as we go. Right on time for the trends. I think to the casual listener, it just sounded like the hip hop that was becoming popular at the time, because Timberland production was all the rage. Double time production was all the rage. We talked about the era of Trick Daddy Nan and JT Money, Who Dat, and a bunch of other tracks. Even R&B songs that started having that little pickup. Even the drama created by the beat of You Got Me, that was a real soap opera type of beat they created to set the tone for what they were doing with that love song. Vocal hymns and harmonies also fill out a few songs on here, most notably Next Movement and Nothing New, because you're hearing it same way that I mentioned on Act 2, Love of My Life, where it's part of the beat. They're not really words, they're just vocals, scat vocals that really fill up the space and create a mood. I'd be remiss not to talk about the amazing production of both the intro and the outro, which have a darkness to them. That warped, muffled, panned, in and out, just the melody is definitely a dark melancholy being used by all of these vocal snippets of people talking. The background is everything. Same thing to be said about Return to Innocence Lost, which starts off with like, you see the roots now on Jimmy Fallon playing whole songs with classroom instruments. That's kind of one of the shticks that they have going on there, one of the go-to routines. And it sounds like that. Sounds like two things at once, really. It sounds like a mobile for babies and a clicking drum kind of instrument or toy being used as an instrument, as it fades into this sad guitar plucking that paints the scene with, again, this warped synth going in and out to really create this dark, sad feeling. This painted it for it to start off and then end the same way. And then whoever's decision, Quest, if that's your decision, this is why you are the genius you are, to whistle and vamp out that way with that super creepy whistle. Oh man, you want to talk about, it was sadness. They created the blue and black hue of Ursula Rucker's words. Probably the best that I've ever heard spoken word put to music. But all these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the second dimension, dimension 2, the cohesiveness of this album. All right, mention all these players involved, all these sounds, all these experimental modes, similar to how I described Wu-Tang Forever with RZA having new toys. It becomes pretty evident that there's new machinery being used on this album. You're hearing a different identity, and so it seems like Kamal's not using the same parts of the keyboard they used on previous albums, or he's not using the same keyboard at all. We factor in that James Poyser and Scott Storch and Chaos are also behind the boards at different points. Then it's like, okay, well, you know, maybe they're all using different instrumentation. But how well does it go together? In true Roots fashion, they were some of the best at blending songs into another. They don't play with it as much here. Songs seem to have more of a hard cutoff or fade out, like Next Movement, Adrenaline, You Don't See Us. Most of the songs here just kind of fade out without falling into the next track. Without a doubt, the caveat to it being a straight ripped sample is it ends with this vamp that obviously is the beginning of the next song, nothing new. It gives it a little bit more weight on the tail end because it's this interlude where Questlove, you hear his vocals, he's leading this little freestyle chant of naming all the members of the group at the time. He's differing the way he says their names each time. Like by the last go round, he's like, Questlove, Rock Shock on the MIC. And then you hear the hums and harmonies of Nothing New coming in, and then it just perfectly leads into the drum hit that starts off that track. All right, so that's one of the few instances of one song going into another. For the most part, they all have their own identity. Even from the intro song, Table of Contents, there's no meeting of the worlds with Malik B's Table of Contents 2 and Black Thought's Table of Contents 1. It goes Black Thought's whole different feel, aggressive energy, cymbals clashing, and they actually fade him out while he's still rapping. There's no like, okay, and this Malik B is up next. There's a pause, and then Malik B just comes in and drops his, and his verse ends the same way that his verse on Clones ends, where the beat just kind of goes up in flames. It's like, cause it's fire. That's it. And his vocals echo. Without that, if you were looking for that, then it's not gonna feel as cohesive as the previous album. If you were not looking for it, it sounds like just most albums, right? Okay, next song, but it does kind of take away from the overall feel of these songs needing each other. Each song feels very independent here, like they could have been placed anywhere. So I don't know how important placement was to this album, especially because it's not very content heavy either. We'll talk about that. There's a whole section where it feels like, where's Malik B? Because all the features take the space that he otherwise would have occupied previously, right? So from the moment Dynamite goes, it's all, you know, Black Thought and another rapper. That goes on until 100% Dundee, but you can argue because it comes right after Malik B's solo that there was room and there was some thought behind where the placement was. What counts here is the bookends of the album. Again, that darkness of the album intro and the darkness of Ursula Rucker's outro, unless you're counting the hidden track. This is still the era of the hidden track, Act 4, The End, where it was the most futuristic beat that I had heard from the Roots up until that point. I was very excited if this was like a marker of what's to come. I'm like, oh man, they're really trying to let you know they can do any kind of hip hop. They're not just doing this jazzy band hip hop. That's dead. Those are the important parts that keep it together for an album called Things Fall Apart. That's where you're getting that feel from, and everything in between. You run the gamut. Eerily melodic, like Step Into the Realm, to something really light and airy, like Love of My Life. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3, the intentional mood and tone of the album. Okay, so this album is named after the Chinua Achebe novel from 1958, Things Fall Apart, which was about Nigerian warriors' reaction to the colonization going on in his village and trying to lead an uprising that evidently did not work out because things have fallen apart. All right, this was described as being an inspired title by Rich Nichols, which was the group's longtime manager and mentor, and it came from a conversation with Questlove about Black Thought's approach to rapping. And at this point, I guess it'd be safe to label Black Thought as a backpacker. I don't know, with all the talk of Black Thought now being considered top 5 dead or alive by a lot of people after the Funk Flex freestyle, latecomers, if he'd still be considered a backpack rapper. But back then, he was really holding the line that was created in 1996 with this real hip-hop versus everything else, and you'll hear that in his lyrics all throughout the album. That's what he's going at, attacking the fake. And they were saying how he's holding on to the old ways while things are changing, because we are officially in 1999. This is the bling era, and you'll see as we cover more albums how that played a role. But this was the year after the big Phoenix year that changed the rules. You can now sing on records. Rappers could sing. Rappers could dress crazy. Rappers could, whole Southern record labels could take over the industry. And the party banger, the club banger, was king. A whole album where the focal point is attacking the fake and, smashing other MCs might sound like it's not keeping up with the times. So that was the inspiration, that parallel there. Does that necessarily carry as a theme throughout the album? I don't know if the inspiration functions as the impetus. So throughout the album, do you feel like there's a focus on things falling apart or not changing with the ways? Not really. More than anything, like I mentioned, you're going to hear that message of where the best MCs and we're better than you non-credible rappers. Even when Dice Raw is adding his verses there, it's always against someone who's phony or fake or perpetrated and not about that life. And Black Thought has stated that back in these times there was still a freeness and freedom to how they were approaching albums. And he admits that as the Roots grew on and evolved, their albums became conceptual in nature, but at this time it was still just about rocking the mic, and that's the bulk of what you get here. The intro, just like Philadelphia Half-Life, has a bunch of excerpts from Roots songs and Roots live performances in the background being panned, as well as discussion points on hip-hop in general, and it ends with a profound statement that always stood out to me, where the speaker is saying, inevitably hip-hop products are treated as being disposable. The strongest piece of that intro is the excerpt from Mo Better Blues, where Denzel Washington's character is arguing with Wesley Snipes' character. Denzel's making a point of, it incenses me that our people are not cultured enough to go and seek out the real and see the beauty of pure art being laid out in front of their faces. They don't support it. And Wesley Snipes is like, that's bull. He's like, the people don't come because you grandiose. I love that word, grandiose. MFers don't play the ish that they like. And it was like simple and plain. And it was the first time it clicked in my teenage mind that, oh, there is an onus on an artist to appeal to as many people as possible. Otherwise, you will find yourself in a small room with a small crowd. And if you're happy with that, cool, but you cannot complain if you did not at least meet halfway to reach the masses that you want to reach. It's the same way with any political leader, anybody with a message. Preaching to the choir is one of the most futile exercises I've witnessed in my life. That's a soapbox I will stand on. Put the medicine in the candy, please. And this is the Roots finally beginning to inch up and ease up a little on that. Not so much in Black Thought's rap approach, but in their song construction. That decision to use that Mo Better Blues clip was probably the most poignant way to start off, besides what's being said in the background, and then the most profound way to end. Totally unrelated, but not unrelated to the theme, is Ursula Rucker's poem about an abusive father who creates this deadly cycle of having a son that falls into the same pattern and loses his life. Things falling apart. Now that it ends with the family huddled over on Christmas morning, knowing, she says, everyone knowing a different truth about their reality, but deep. Everything in between that, take it or leave it if we're thinking about themes. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 4, the repetition factor versus the diversity of words and sounds, right? So, production-wise, I'll say this. You listen to Spark and you listen to Adrenaline. Now, if Spark was Kamal on the keys and Adrenaline was Scott Storch's baby, then out of pure coincidence, cool. Or maybe they were around each other and had that distant influence thing that happens where you think you heard something, or you got a melody in your head and you don't know that it came from something else. But the underlying melodies sound really similar. I know one is more violin bass or manipulated Wurlitzer piano, and the other is pure keys, but the is in the same family as, and that seems to be the range of the keys throughout the whole album. That's kind of where they go. It's just kind of, they're not these hypnotic melodies, they're more these like circular loop, again, ostinato being the phrase that was used, but those two in particular are similar, not in a cousin kind of way, like in a sibling kind of way. As I listen to Spark, I'm like, this sounds like a slowed down melody of Adrenaline played in a different octave or whatever. There's accented keys on that track, but it's the consistent melody that I'm talking about. So that could add to some of the repetitive quality. There's a lot of warped manipulation going on here. I talked about the warp sounds on the intro. I talked about the warp sounds on Double Trouble. There's warp sounds that create the main beat on Act 4, the end, that have that futuristic feel. It very much feels like the Roots playing with new toys and new directions. Spastic drums. It's a very up-tempo album. There's fewer tracks where things slow down. You Got Me, Love of My Life, Spark, those are the slower tracks, but in general it's an up-tempo. If the album was a little shorter by 1 or 2 songs, you may not feel the repetition as much, but after a while you start seeing this is more so a deliberate direction, or this is how the collection of songs that they chose turned out. Word-wise, yes, there's more intentional branding on this album than before, is what it feels like. As much as the Roots have mentioned the Fifth Dynasty, there's way more shouting that out throughout almost every track on here that's braggadocio, at least. So P5D, Fifth Dynasty. And I don't know if they felt like the crew was getting stronger at that point, or again, because we're in the era of clans, cliques, posses, crews, that it's like, oh, we need to rap ours harder. There's no shortage of the word lyrical, as Black Thought says it. You get the use of the word Dundee, which I still don't have a full explanation for. I understand that that might have been Philly slang at the time. Sounds like it was really short-lived Philly slang, and I'm not sure if it's Philly slang that the Roots were trying to start, inside crew Philly slang, or if the streets of Philly were really running around using Dundee as an adjective. But it lasted probably about as long as Gully in New York lasted. It wasn't around long, but you'll hear that a couple times. Other than that, you're not getting repetition in the sense of lazy wording per verse. No, just the intentional branding portion of this use of slang and repping the crew. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5. The content versus the amount of songs. Okay, I mentioned previously, not a lot of content on this album in general, not even by Roots standards. Just the dynamics here are more focused on just rapping for the sake of rapping and improving how good at rapping they are. A more aggressive take on it. When you listen to tracks like Adrenaline, Nothing New, 100% Dundee, and You Don't See Us, they're out for blood. Malik B and Black Thought and Dice Raw are just going at whatever invisible competition lies. You'll see in articles they consider themselves quiet brotherly competition, but the bite is towards anyone not them. and it's more apparent. It's like listening to a bunch of tracks in the same spirit as clones. So that doesn't leave a lot of room to talk about political things, the ills of the hood. Instead, Black Thought does this thing that a lot of rappers do, where they marry elements of social political awareness in their braggadocio. Nas being one of the greatest examples of that. Like, it's never a straightforward brag rap or a straightforward political song, because in the middle of that, we talk about how fly he is and how nice he is on the mic, and that's what Black Thought does here. Like, so on a track like You Don't See Us, while Malik B and Dice Raw on straight attack against the fraudulent, Black Thought comes in with a double entendre, okay, computer, radio head, and starts talking about his people still being fooled by the government and catching up. And that's his little insertion there, and end it nicely on a braggadocio note. Like, hey, you can't get us. And you'll see the same thing on Next Movement. The whole state of things in the world about to change. Black rain falling from the sky looks strange. Like, he's splicing it in there right before going into, the way he rocks the mic. And Malik B does the same thing. He's always incorporating his spiritual conflict, which is something we see from a lot of Muslim Philly rappers. This jihad, this internal jihad of being worldly and being on your deen. And so in the middle of that, he'll say, I should be able to make dawah. Or, he says, what's inside of me is it the larceny of piety. It's really interesting how Malik B uses his solo time or his introspective time in the midst of being menacing and having the most street-based raps out of the whole crew. But you get that. That's where you're going to get your content, with the exception of the direct romance song about relationships, You Got Me, and Love of My Life, which is about hip-hop as a relationship. Those are really the only deviations and the only times that you're getting straightforward content. And you count Ursula Rucker's contribution, and there you go. You might argue that you don't need much more because that was so heavy. So you got relationships, heaviness, and throughout these splashes of reflection and social commentary. If that's enough for you, if it's not enough for you, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 6, the features. The Roots are infamous for putting people on. Some credit them for being responsible for helping to launch Scott Storch's career. Scott Storch himself might also give them that credit. But then you have to also consider their collaborations with JD. JD is here in a very present essence, even if he's not on the mic. And then James Poyser, Chaos. You have folk like Lady B on here. This is the Roots' way of paying homage to Philly. They're always very Philly-minded on these 90s albums. And Lady B, even though she is most well known as an iconic radio figure in Philadelphia radio history, they do a nod back to her rapping days, which is why the hook sounds pretty basic here. Take heed, y'all. We about to give y'all what you need, y'all. She's on there, she's featured, accented. She's not doing the verse, but she's doing the vocals on the hook with them. Similar to what Eve is doing. This is Eve when she was still Eve of Destruction. She was rolling around with Dr. Dre's camp. You might have heard her on the Bullworth soundtrack around this time. She's doing the background vocals on Nothing New, where they just kind of like mumble in the hook. Nothing new, nothing new. You're not saying nothing new. That's her. And then of course she gets the verse that Black Thought wrote for You Got Me, which he originally was going to do himself. If you hear the Spanish hook version of this, sung by Mercedes of the Jazzy Fat Nasties, you'll hear that Black Thought just does his own second verse, a new one for that version. Dynamite features Rehani, also known as ELO. I mentioned the Jazzy Fat Nasties. They are on the album, providing background vocals on different tracks, most notably on the Next Movement, where they're fully credited as a feature, as well as DJ Jazzy Jeff doing the scratches. You have Scratch and Rozelle. I don't know if you really consider them features, because at this point they were photographed and lumped in as being members of the band at the time. I think they've always kind of been more so extended. This is the beginning of the end for Black Thought and Malik B being a consistent duo as the faces of the band. Comment on Act 2, Love of My Life. This is before the concept just got super played out. It was genius back then to have Common revisit I Used to Love Her. It's the first time he's been pulled back to do it. Now he's been pulled back to do it so many times that it's like, okay, cool, but we get it, Common. to the point that it could be argued that Common probably overshadowed Black Thought, because Black Thought is kind of doing a bare bones, just kind of straightforward, hey, I loved you, I went on tour because of you, and I rocked the mic. Where Common started doing that double entendre thing, where he would do it from the moment he comes on. This is Common's bread and butter. It's like going to Steph Curry in a 3-point contest, or going to, I don't know, Vince Carter for a slam dunk contest. That's what they do. That's what they specialize in, right? So, of course, there's going to be a little edge there. Now, whereas with Double Trouble, Mos and Black Thought, this is the pairing that we didn't know we needed, and it almost made everyone question, okay, well, why aren't you two the duo? If you're not gonna have Malik B on every track, and you're just gonna have everybody and their mama feature with you other than your group mate, then just adopt Mos. And of course, it naturally brings up, well, why does Mos need to do a duo with anyone else? So the story is, and I'm chuckling at this because my bias exists, because any Talib Kweli stuff makes me laugh. He was in the studio, and Black Thought says he doesn't really know why, because he said there was some miscommunication, because he was writing a verse for this. They said he was supposed to be featured on the song with Mos, but that was never what Black Thought communicated. So maybe Mos told him, hey, come do this track with us. And he was, in mid-session, he had to explain, hey, this is just a tag team, Double Trouble, not Triple Trouble. So, because we got this good back and forth thing going. And as you know, the Talib Kweli is going on to collaborate with the Roots subsequently. Funnily enough, Black Thought said he could tell for a minute that Kweli didn't feel like he rocked with him because of that, because there's a point where the story goes, Mos left out to get a fish sandwich in the middle of the session after finishing writing his verse but not recording it yet. Black Thought had recorded his part, left to eat, and never came back. And Talib's still in the studio. He's like, it's the awkward. But man, when I tell you, best decision ever made to not have this be a Black Star feature track and just let it be Black Thought and Mos Def, or Black Thought and the Black Man from Black Star. Genius. Shout out to Black Thought for standing on that, because it just wouldn't have hit the same. And their back and forth game, that was something that was missing on this album. There's not a track on here where Black Thought and Malik B go back and forth, and Black Thought was able to do it so masterfully with Mos Def. And Mos Def led in a lot of ways that song. He leads on the hook, He does the whole outro. Black Thought really let most have a lot of freedom on there, but it didn't feel like an overshadowing kind of pairing. Having a third element in there wouldn't have helped, especially with Talib Kweli's offbeat rapping style at the time. Yeah, there I said it. So of course, most notably, Erykah Badu doing the hook on You Got Me, which there was a big hubbub about, to the point where Questlove put an ultimatum because they insisted that Jill Scott, who was the original writer and singer on the track, when they met her from Jazzy Jeff Studios, just kind of on the circuit, they were trying to put her on, and the record company was like, look, you guys finally are delivering us something we can get radio play from and possibly be a hit on the Billboard. We need a big name. The band wasn't feeling that. Record company made an executive decision. By the time it was time to put it out and make a video, I'm sure they appreciated what Erykah did to it. The original version with Jill Scott singing floating around there somewhere. She went on tour, sang it live plenty of times. That's where we get the infamous "My name is Jillsco." You know, y'all know the rest. Adrenaline, which the legend goes that it was originally supposed to feature Big Pun as a favor back for Black Thought's verse on Super Lyrical. Pun was on this, but he couldn't make it the day they were supposed to record it, and they had a deadline due to being arrested for parking tickets. I wonder what this song would have sounded like with a Pun feature. Instead, at the last minute, they squeezed in Beanie Siegel, who this was also his debut single year, but he had previously made his debut on Jay-Z's Reservoir Dogs on the Hard Knock Life album, which we also reviewed, and you can check that out. But this is lining up, and he's the feature on here right when he's about to come out. Now knowing what Beanie Siegel is and the name he went on to make for himself, it's a great swap out. There's no replacing Pun, but if you're gonna get someone else of that same ilk, there you go. All right, so those are the features on the album. It's up to you to determine whether they help or hurt the album. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to Dimension 7. Do the weakest songs, or does the weakest song on the album bring it down? Of course, as always, the most subjective dimension. It is up to you to determine if there even is a weak song on this album and how weak it is and what impact that makes. I mentioned how Malik B chose the lightest beat on here in terms of just the impact that it makes, unless you're really in tune to what Malik is saying. But beat wise, it's just there, and it has the least going on, so it's not light the same way that Love of My Life and Nothing New. But Nothing New is we talked about the aggression of the verses, going with that guitar strumming and the vocals in the back. Same thing with his table of contents too, offering that could be a thing. So if those beats are too slow, too simple, but Adrenaline is too up-tempo and has way too much going on with the scratching and the violins and the escalating piano note. Bing, 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 bing. It's a lot, because they're rapping to match that pace too. Same thing with 100% Dundee. If that's just too up-tempo for you, just too in your face, I can see that. Feature-wise, Rahani being someone that most of the mainstream have never heard of, it could feel like what's this? Why wasn't this Malik B on the track? Keeps up with Black Thought. It's a nice vocal contrast, but it also makes you feel like, why not for a group that already has 2 rappers? Eve, if you don't like Eve's part on You Got Me, if you don't like Erykah Badu singing, if you don't like her singing, I've never heard of anybody that did not. But yeah, if you don't like Dice Raw's rapping on here, if you think Malik B is not keeping up as much as he did on the previous album, all these things could be factors. If you don't like Mos Def doing all the old school references that he does towards the end of Double Trouble, there you go. All those things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the weakest songs and how much they bring it down. That takes us to Dimension 8, Mass Appeal. Okay, when we're talking about Mass Appeal, I don't know if the Roots were making the hardest effort they could have to crack things open, but there was definitely an energy of we want to take things further than we did last time. They got a touch of radio play and video play with what they do. So now, next movement, You Got Me, and to an extent, Act 2, Love of My Life, you can tell were their pushes to not compromise who they are and what they're doing, but as I mentioned earlier, meet halfway. You Got Me, this is one of the few instances of the record label being right. The decision to put Erykah Badu on the hook has everything to do with the main component of this album, which is timing, which I'm going to jump into. But if they would have introduced Jill Scott, which the Roots are amazing at introducing people, it just wouldn't have hit the same. It just wasn't her time yet. Her time was 1 year away, and it worked out the way it needed to. This single alone led this album to go gold and eventually platinum, being a first for the group. Keep in mind, this is 1 year before Common going gold for the very first time with his fourth album, which is another Soulquarians product. So let's talk about timing. The development of the Soulquarians. In Black Thought's book, The Upcycled Self, he mentioned that a physical fight that he had with Questlove in the offices of the record label changed their relationship forever, because it was over having like credit in the liner notes, because Black Thought in a lot of ways is a co-producer. This is why the Grand Wizards exist. He may not play the instruments, but we've learned on this channel through talking about many albums that production is a collaborative process where arrangement is also a big factor and facet. I don't have musical language. There are other shows out there, I'm not going to mention them, by musical experts who have the language. They can tell you about syncopation and what note and what key things were in. I could tell you it was boom bap and this and that, but I still know my ish, right? This is why hopefully you return here and listen to me talk for 20 to 65 minutes sometimes, depending on the episode. But yeah, that fight, Black Thought said, same day he was over it. He said it forever changed Questlove and his outlook on their brother type relationship. And he started forming that same kind of alliance with people outside the crew, which at first made Black Thought say, well, damn, why? That includes rappers that Questlove would work with. But most notably the Soulquarians. That was his attempt. It's almost like when you have a best friend in middle school and then you go to high school and they have newer best friends as well in addition to you, and you're like, damn, we used to do everything together, now you're doing everything with more people. But because of this, you got a period which a lot of people behold as one of the most precious eras in modern music, that era where neo soul and what used to be called alternative hip-hop, just more music-centered hip-hop, started thriving. And the products we got from that time are indelible, because Questlove started going in this direction by all this collaboration going on at Electric Ladyland Studios, spawned this newness. The other beautiful thing about timing is you can speculate and argue on whether, okay, cool, Black Thought and the Roots knew that Eve was signed to Dre, and there had to be some knowledge that Beanie was signed to Rockefeller, so they knew that these weren't just like the chance that was taken on Rehani, where it's like, okay, there's nothing major label or mainstream buzzing with ELO right now. This is just my man's, and I'm going to feature him the same way we got Dice Raw here, except that he's not Roots crew officially. It's just a feature that I want to put on. Here, there had to be some knowing. If not, it is the most serendipitous timing ever, because they featured these two Philly acts right on the crux of them becoming figures that would blow up within that same year. Beans was one of the most talked about new rappers in 1999 going into 2000. The Truth was about to come out, but I think What a Thug About was bubbling on the mixed circuits. He was the buzzed about rapper. And then you have Eve, who was just making her debut on the Rough Riders Anthem remix, about to drop her single What Y'all Want, if it hadn't already dropped, off the Rough Riders compilation album. So, I mean, her star was in place. and you just happen to feature them. Right off 2 years into Erykah Badu being one of the hottest names in R&B, she had a breakout debut album, followed it up with a live album and singles like Southern Girl, where Rozelle is doing the beat for her, and this is returning a favor in a different way. And it's just like, man, you guys are striking while everything is hot. Right before Scott Storch goes and helps produce on Dr. Dre's 2001 album. I mean, he probably already produced within that same year, but right before his name started buzzing from that production. It's just the beauty of timing is nothing short of amazing. And then we have to factor in Mos Def coming off of Black Star's album, coming off of underground buzz and notoriety. But if there was any doubt about his solo album coming out later that year, this proved, this man was a force before Black Star, and he will continue to be a force after, and that solidified it. He can do good with anyone or on his own. He can take over. So setting the stage for that, Jazzy Fat Nasty's album also came out after this, and DJ Jazzy Jeff started getting recognized on his own without the Fresh Prince attachment, because he was putting out his Hidden Beach collective, and they were about to make a bunch of noise the following year with Music Soul Child and Jill Scott productions all over those albums. So timing, brilliance, and this is just background music knowledge. What it did for the Roots as a band, it entered them into the mainstream. People got to know them. They only had 2 videos, but Next Movement got consistent video play. It was a very innovative video. They're like upside down, they're playing on the ceiling, they're playing on the side walls, and I'm sure it got mild radio play and probably a regular rotation in Philadelphia. My Philly folk out there can let me know, but it's a memorable track. I think it's one of the tracks that the Roots have come to be known by now. And Love of My Life, even though it wasn't put out there with a video or anything, it winds up being used as the intro song for the movie Brown Sugar. It comes on a couple years later. I think that movie came out in 2002, but I instantly recognized as soon as it came on, I was like, this is the perfect song for this. So it's another song, a deep cut that is not really a deep cut. It's similar to how when we went over the Black Star album, we talked about Brown Skin Lady not being released as an official single and given that push, but people treating it as such. So I mean, they had legs and more commercial viability and visibility than ever before from this album. This is their only album to go platinum, and probably the album similar to Outkast, Aquemini, where people started to be fans. Although they'll probably lie and say they were there from the beginning. But this is the album that got them the biggest audience and more ears and eyes on them for the next couple. All right? Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to my favorite dimension, Dimension 9, the 3 I's. Impact, innovation, influence. Okay, what is the impact? The impact is that this album created that same feel when people would start paying attention to something that's always been there. It's like, oh, these guys, oh yeah, they're dope. And now they're on the radar. That's what this album did. I remember the video also causing a lot of conversation for You Got Me, because similar to how Next Movement was innovative visually, the video was a different story than the verses. So people falling out on the street, he's walking over bodies all throughout the projects, and at the end people wake up and start running the same way you saw folk running in the What They Do videos. It's a callback to that. It's inspired by other music video, but a hip-hop take on it. The most innovation you're going to get, at least from a hip-hop standpoint, is the cover art, where they specifically wanted to use striking imagery from pivotal moments, pivotal tragedies in global history. And when this came out, the rollout, this was a big deal, probably to me, because I remember being the biggest Roots fan and awaiting this. And I started seeing posters all over, and it would be of the different variant covers. And at the time there were 5. And I remember choosing the one I wanted based on the ads, because the magazine ads. So you have the church bombing, you have the mob boss killed in the 1930s with the ace card in his hand. Then you have the Somalian child with tears coming down his face. You have the two black folk running from the cops from the Bed-Stuy riots. And then the one that's most striking to me is the baby screaming at the old Shanghai train station during World War II from the Japanese warfare going on there. Seeing that, you're like, what are these guys up to? What point are they trying to make? And in a lot of ways, the cover art made more of the deeper points than the album itself made. Like I keep mentioning how it started and how it ended. The cover is also the final piece and makes up for the lack of content in between, because it's a reflection of just human history and human nature. And I always thought that was interesting to get conversation going, to get buzz going. You got red words, you got bold-faced print, and it's saying a lot by saying a little. And for hip hop, that was new. Other genres, especially rock, had been doing that for a long time. Here's this real, graphic image. Here's this real thought-provoking image. We want you to look into yourself and look into life by looking at this cover. That's what it was doing. Most rap covers are just the rappers in a pose. Their last album cover was that. Fish Islands, We're on the Street Corner, We Are the Roots. They wanted to let you know who they are. Now they're like, you know us enough, and we don't even care as much if you know us. We're trying to make a statement here. Boom. Influence, when I hear rappers like Elzhi, Blue, you can tell that there was some listening to this album, of course. Kendrick Lamar, any black and white rap cover that's meant to have stark imagery can be a callback to this, whether the rapper had this in their collection or not. It still set a standard. But direct influence, I don't know. The bevy of people talking about how Black Thought is one of the illest, you have to believe that this many people were tuned into this album. But what it did for the group, it raised their profile. This album is why they're able to be the house band on Jimmy Fallon now, because this made them a name that people knew off the bat. They didn't have to recollect them. It's like, oh no, the Roots. So every girl I've met, You Got Me is on their playlist. Even if they don't have any other Roots song, they know that. Every time we used to do a romantic set list as a band, or karaoke, someone's gonna request this. So there you go. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to the final dimension, the overall timelessness and uniqueness of this album. I do think there's an element of 1999-ness when you listen to how they chose the instrumentation, some of the keys, some of the warp sounds, but not in the sense of keeping up with any trends, just the crispness, the feel of it. There's no vintage on here. Everything is forward. With that though, it also has the element of making it before its time. When you hear a track like 100% Dundee and Double Trouble, as much as it's supposed to have all these throwback sensibilities with the zin, 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 and all of that, it felt very new and pushing the boundary. By the time you get to Act 4 at the end, it's like, oh, okay, where are we going with this next movement? The whole album was very forward thinking. You don't see us, new feels, and because of that, it avoided anything that would make it sound dated. And the Roots are never really in danger of making dated material because they create musical product at the heart. I mentioned Dynamite being a track that if you're listening to a Dilla playlist, it fits right in there with anything that he made in the 2000s, because Dilla just pulls from so many spaces. One of the few hip hop tracks that are that jazz bass centered. Yeah, with that said, remaking the Schoolie D song might have been a little lazy, but when you get the idea of what they were doing, that they're so Philly based, that they put Lady B on it, that this was a conscious decision, and this probably did get a little radio play off the strength of that locally, cool. When you hear tracks that didn't make it to this album, that were released around the same time, that either was supposed to or could have been, like What You Want featuring Jaguar, The Lesson 3 featuring Jaguar, and Quicksand Millennium, which when I discovered a year later, I was super mad that it wasn't on the album, because that was content. Then it's like, okay, why were some of these choices made? I could have easily swapped out Without a Doubt and Dynamite for Lesson 3 and Quicksand Millennium, and I feel like that would have helped the album sound more cohesive, not just because it would have been more Malik B on the album, but also because musically it added two different feels. There's nothing that sounded like the way the keys were played on Lesson 3, Jaguar being a new voice to shake things up on the album, and then Quicksand Millennium, just the musicality of it, the sadness, there's nothing else like that in the content. And then what you want, if you wanted to just tip the scales a little bit more towards commercial, you could sacrifice another track. Which one, I don't know, but that's just my personal preference. All these things are something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats when you're thinking about the overall timelessness and uniqueness of this album. That concludes the Category 1 review and breakdown of the 1999 classic turned in 25, Things Fall Apart. Join us for Category 2, where we go over the rap performance on this album. Until then, y'all know what it is. F a Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it.